I will just say two things. We will consider two slides that we had let apart yesterday on the last discovery or last debate that is interesting for our perspective. And then we proceed to switch to complex system. As you will remark, I hope, you will better understand how the revolution of complex system is just playing in contrast with what we said in the previous two lectures, okay? That is, now such as a movement appears as a revolution in our worldview because we had, or that we outlined what it was before. And then the novelty, and also from a social and cultural standpoint, the difficulty to understand and to let permeate society by the lexicon and by the worldview of complex systems. Okay? So just let go back to the yesterday lecture, and we have to consider the last opening moment to a new kind of science, not only to new horizon of atom physics, what is the main purpose of quantum mechanics, but also philosophically speaking to a new worldview, okay? And especially the debate that you can find in the philosophical writings on the one side of Einstein and on the other side of Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg about unity or disunity, complementarity among scientific theories, okay? Other scientific worldviews. In quantum mechanics, there are observable, this is the main thesis that concerns us philosophically, physical entities that cannot be measured and simultaneously determined with absolute precision. Such observable are defined as not compatible as state vectors. And a bit technical, we will switch the technicality in this context. And in a mathematical formalism, Hilbert space are non-commutative operators. For example, just in order to explain that, if you will determine position and speed on one side and mass on the position and speed for mesoscopic bodies, okay, on these macroscopic bodies, we can use certain tools that let us, with precision, determine it. For subatomic features, this is not possible. That's just true. So space vectors and Hilbert space are formal tools that let us, or that don't let us, this is discovery of Heisenberg, we can open also a debate on the collapse of wave function by Schrödinger, but it's exactly the same situation, exactly from the point of view of indeterminacy or not full determinability, exactly the same, but with in some context, what is interesting, in some context, this tool enables us to commutate two different aspects, measurement aspect of the same thing, okay? In other contexts, and I underline, in other epistemic contexts, it is no longer possible, or not possible at all, okay? It not means, again, a sort of mystic of quantum mechanic, that there is an indeterminacy of the world and there is a sort of beyond in the things and so on and so on. We let this aside. We stay at the rational, okay? But there is a sort of entry of contextuality of scientific approach in our approach to the world. Of course, contextuality and context does not appear only and just by quantum mechanics, as said yesterday, okay? 20th century philosophy of language, first of all, Wittgenstein, but not only, even Husserl phenomenology about horizon experience and the structure of horizon in experience, sketches already a sort of radical contextuality of our experience of the world. But as yesterday, why do we use quantum mechanics instead of philosophy? Because some can come and say, but okay, this is just a sort of speculation, instead of if we experience the thing without contextuality. It's not true. Even in the strongest experimentally oriented form of experience, very, very secured from the point of view of procedures, the context comes in and breaks, if you will, this feeling of absolute determination of the thing that we had in classical mechanics. Okay? So, if you will, I could use just another stream of authors that is taken from philosophy and taken from philosophy to say the same thing, but I will not save me, or will not have saved me from the objection, this is just mere speculation. Here there is no mere speculation. If so these state vectors are not compatible, this is not commutable, there is nothing to do with cultural, with ideological, or with someone else literary features orientation of the researcher. It's something that we can observe. Or once the data put it into a operator, this is also computing tools, that is impossible to commute. And I repeat, but this would be useful also for our complexity things or stuff. There is no mystical uncertainty, okay? For example, there is an analysis of a neoliberal journal that published last year, one half philosophical author, the last year sort of polemic paper about complexity theory by showing the complexity thinking bringing us to paralysis, we need to act, so we have to be sure. So that's sort of thing. There are no philosophical texture, or they're just so polemic because you have nothing to do against the non-commutation of vectors. You have nothing to do about the emergence in certain system or bifurcation. If you will certainty, you go otherwise in other contexts, but in context of knowledge, when you apply your knowledge tool in certain contexts, I will not say that everywhere is uncertainty. What is a sort of step making from the mysticisms of quantum mechanics and so on and so on. In certain contexts, they are very numerous, certain contexts, our tools of determination of the debt to determinate, or the determinable, don't enable us to acquire a full determination. There is always a blind spot in the determination. So an uncertainty principle, as English translation of unscharf relation, okay, is not really precise, because this unscharf is something that is not completely defined, that is not uncertain, okay? So we are not uncertain about quantum states. There is just that there is no sharp determination. That's just another thing. You know, philosophy and critical thinking learn always to look through the words, because the words orient itself to certain mental process and to associate sounds to concept or to idealities, but there is no automatic correspondence between one expression and the right expression as it was formulated. For example, we make another example in order to introduce itself in this debate, general relativity of Albert Einstein, okay? Then the people that don't know anything about physics or about the genesis of relativity theory make the holistic jump that everything is relative. No, but by Einstein, it's all but relative. It's a very strong deterministic tool in order to determine cosmological process. What is relative is something in the theory that determines, this is the mass and energy, determines the curvature of space-time. But the equation says not that everything is relative. Just some factor become relative instead to be absolute, like by Newton or by his successor, to a certain parameters that we can identify, mass, and so on, measure, and so on, and so on. So from now, pay attention to the words, because there is a very, very thin threshold between to take rigorously what complex is and to go on the other side to the sort of superstition or mystical skepticism, and so on, and so on. For this reason, our introduction or our genealogy of emergence of complex world till the end of these lectures will try to anchor our discourse to positive, shareable, scientific things. It's not just a sort of pleasure for philosophy of science. This is always present in philosophy of science. It's a sort of prelude of theoretical philosophy or for mathematics. But there is, because the definition of the structures in science and even the philosophical issues coming from that definition, don't let oscillate our thinking between these two sides. We stay steadily, okay, on the precision, okay? Then eventually, in the last two lectures, we are building, common building to complex view, a bit generalize the thing, okay? For example, for Gödel incompleteness, people speculate, no, Gödel incompleteness theorems as very, very strength in saying where is incompleteness and how incompleteness works in certain contexts, that is, concepts of formal logical computation, predicates, and so on, and so on. The same things for physics. Why? Because in a certain stream of complex thinking, mysticism or the irrationalism arise, okay? Everything is complex, everything is uncertain, everything is relative. There is just fakes, okay? If I can, bullshit. Because the people, and this is the key feature for every rational work in philosophy, in knowledge, and so on and so on, do not accept to be patiently brought step by step, elaborate, unfold structure, and so on and so on. Because we like general theses, okay? People comes, we was speaking yesterday about this tendency in today philosophy and present the revolutionary thesis. This revolutionary thesis is not revolutionary because it's thought the day before, 1 month before, just presented, not sedimented, and then come another to present a revolutionary thesis, and then come another, just a sort of emergency of fake news, you know? On the contrary, the patient work of the concept, like Hegel says, the Anstrengung des Begriffes, is to follow patiently the inner dynamics of thinking structure and what we will do. Okay? So uncertainty is not a skeptical issue in quantum mechanics and cannot be generalized as a skeptical moment in knowledge, not by chance. From quantum mechanics and from standard theory came huge discoveries and huge applications. So it's perfectly opposed to skepticism. Okay? The product of the uncertainty of delta x, which measures position, and delta px, which measures angular momentum, are always constitutively greater or equal to the reduced Planck constant. The same can be stated for the variables time and energy. This is just a technical explication. So, what is the problem? What is the problem posed not to the theoretical physicist, but to the philosopher theoretical physicist? That is, to the people, to the man, in this case Einstein, that think scientifically but also philosophically. The problem is that such the negative results for the unity of a physical worldview, but positive results for physics are colliding together. That is, we have a very, very positive result, huge result, for physics, experimental physics, or theoretical experimental physics, but at the other side, philosophically, this positive result is a negative issue for our tendency to unify everything. Okay? So, Albert Einstein, Boris Podolsky, and Nader Rosen published 1935 a very, very famous paper named EPR, Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen. Can quantum mechanical description of physical reality be considered complete? Of course, the completeness, the Vollständigkeit, is inspired as problem from Gödel. You know? That is the completeness problem that arises for logic is, in a very genius step, applied also to the problem of unification of physics. Okay? In a complete theory, like we presume to be that of Newton, for example, there is an element corresponding to each element of reality, as we said yesterday, as the ground postulate of Cartesian world. So we can proceed to build the unity of science, just having fixed the relation between the observer and the object, or more refinedly, an element of the theory conceived by the knowing subject, not the individual. Individual does not matter. We can also be 50. We consider a theory. We must be able to associate to the element of a theory an element in reality. The cognitive relation, or Subjekt-Objekt-Erkenntnisbeziehung in German, okay, must be steady, stable. It's clearly formulated. In a complete theory, there is an element corresponding to each element of reality. a sufficient condition for reality of a physical quantity is the possibility of predicting it with certainty or with necessity, without disturbing the system. In quantum mechanics, in the case of two physical quantities, momentum described by non-commuting operators, the knowledge of one precludes the knowledge of the other. Then, either the description of reality given by the wave function in quantum mechanics is not complete, or these two quantities cannot have simultaneous reality. That is a very paradoxical thing. You can also smell what is the urgence for Einstein, that was an old-fashioned rationalist, of posing that problem. If you will, we have some correspondence between the new and the old generation in science and philosophy and so on and so on. We have figures like old rationalists, like Frege, like Bertrand Russell, like Hilbert, like Einstein. They still believe to the need of unity of science. This is a rationalist. This is an old Greek form of rationalism that conflict or that collide with new discoveries. The new people like Wittgenstein, like Heisenberg or the Pauli are not irrationalists, but they can conceive of their age, their culture, their cultural background, the events in the history let them conceive another form of rationality that is not depending on the need of the unity of science or knowledge. Then Bohr responds, the finite interaction, or simply responds, between object and measuring agencies conditioned by the very existence of the quantum action entails, because of the impossibility of controlling the reaction of the object on the measuring instruments if there are no to serve their purpose, the necessity of a final renunciation of the classical idea of causality. But if we consider what we said yesterday, the classical idea of causality is not an element whatsoever of the classical idea of rationality. It's a central element of rationality because the mechanism corresponds to the ordo sive mensura and corresponds to the original project of rationality. So, renunciation of the classical idea, to the classical idea of causality, is not a moment whatsoever in a sort of local development of scientific debates. It's a sort of central moment, or if you will, this is my introduction, is not what they say, sort of parricide. Okay? That is, we have to erase the sort of central moment of the old idea of rationality. Why? Not why we renounce to the idea of causality, of course, because we don't have physics. Because we have to renounce to the holistic idea of causality, that is to absolute mechanism. And a radical revision of our attitude towards the problem of physical reality. And of course, this is the answer. Can quantum mechanical description of physical reality be considered complete. That is, the renunciation of the classical ideal of reality, of causality, corresponds, we go slowly, we have time, so no problem, and the radical revision of our attitude towards the problem of physical reality are not something internal to debates among great physicists. It's something that interests our idea to conceive the world, because physics is the layer zero of our approach to physics, to the world. Okay? So if at this layer there is no global possibility of determination of causality, even our idea of rationalism must be changed. The classical revision begins with the radical revision of our attitude towards the problem of physical reality, but extends itself to our idea of rationality. So, with a nice word, think differently, that is the problem. And in order to explain this problem, let me told this story. The following concern a question in physics degree exam at the University of Copenhagen. Describe how to determine the height of a skyscraper using a barometer. Do you know this story? One student replied, you tie a long piece of string to the neck of the barometer, then lower the barometer from the roof of the skyscraper to the ground. The length of the string plus the length of the barometer will equal to the height of the building. Is a problem solution. At this point of reading, the professor were really upset. This ugly original answer so incensed the instructor that the students was failed. The students appealed on the grounds that this answer was indisputably correct, and the university appointed an independent arbiter to decide the case. What appears in science? So let's call a third in order to say what it is. The arbiter judged that the answer was indeed correct, but did not display knowledge of physics. To resolve the problem, it was decided to call the students in and allow him 6 minutes in which to provide a verbal answer, which showed at least a minimal familiarity to the principle of physics. For 5 minutes, the student sat in silence, forehead creased in thought. The arbiter reminded him that he was running out, to which the students replied that had several extremely relevant answers, but couldn't make up his mind which to use. On being advised to hurry up, the students replied as follows. Firstly, you could take the barometer up to the roof of the skyscraper, drop it over the edge, and measure the time it takes to reach the ground. The height of the building can then be worked out from the formula h equals 0.5 gram xt squared, but bad luck on the barometer. Or if the sun is shining, you could measure the height of the barometer, then set it in and measure the length of the shadow. Then you measure the length of the skyscraper shadow, and thereafter is a simple matter of proportional arithmetic to work out the height of the skyscraper. Sort of Eratosthenes solution, what I say. But if you wanted to be highly scientific about it, you could tie a short piece of string to the barometer, swinging like a pendulum, first at the ground level and then on the roof of the skyscraper. The height is worked out by the difference in the restoring force T equal to P square root Lg. Or if the skyscraper is an outside emergency staircase, it will be easier to walk in and mark off the height of the skyscraper in barometer lengths, then add them up. Tick, 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 tick. If you merely want to be boring and orthodox about it, of course, you could use the barometer to measure the air pressure on the roof of the skyscraper. So if you want to be boring and orthodox. to measure the air pressure on the roof, on the skyscraper, and on the ground, and convert the difference in millibars into meter to give the height of the building. But since we are constantly being exhorted to exercise independence of mind and apply scientific methods, undoubtedly the best way will be to knock on the janitor's door and say to him, if you would like a nice new barometer, I will give you this one if you tell me the height of the skyscraper. You know, that is think differently. And the man who is the protagonist of this story, the student is generally said to be Niels Henrik David Bohr, that of radical revision, Nobel Prize of Physics in 1922, and the referee is supposed to be the chemist Sir Ernest Rutherford, that of the model of the atom, Nobel Prize of Chemistry in 1998, even if they didn't meet until Bohr finished his scholarship. Okay, that's what means think differently. And what brings is a funny story. What brings us to think differently is not to think simply with fantasy outside rationality, but to find new paths in order to habit our rational horizon or our approach to phenomena. From this perspective, especially since the debate between Einstein and the Copenhagen School on the concept of word picture and completeness of the Weltbild, that we resume what we experienced in the last two lectures, the contours of a new worldview in which the completeness of logical processes and the completeness of determinism no longer represent the horizon and the normative framework of science will be outlined. From this open worldview, station leading to an epistemic definition of the complex will begin to be defined. Methodologically, we will focus on EMERGE, that is the sum of our lectures, of the new scientific lexicon in seminal work that displayed an epistemic-oriented approach to the complexity, by considering couples or concepts where the shift between the two worldviews has been outlined. And the first that will be reconsidered, no problem, is between object and system. That will be outlined today, okay? Because in your naive view, but also in your view educated by modern science, your knowledge deals with objects. Nothing is more trivial, but nothing is more dangerous, okay? So we can, with some degree of approximation, says that we have 3 steps corresponding to the 3 great scientific paradigms, and even now entry ontology from the door to great paradigmatic paradigms of ontology in the history of our civilization. The first element is the thing, okay? The res in the scholasticism. So we experience not phenomena, but experience at first and sedimentate our patterns of world experience by experiencing things, okay? The early child playing with cubes or with tools experience thing and hypostatize or sedimentate patterns able to decipher this experience of things, okay? From the point of view of ontology, we have a very strong definition of this thing experience by Aristotle metaphysics. And even in this case, there is a correspondence, not so strong or not so hard like in modern science, between logic and ontology. That is, there is well-known history. Aristotle refines his metaphysical structures by working on the previous logical writings, namely categories, first or second analytics, and so on and so on. We have no pens? Yeah. In a very, very rude and rough way, there is a sort of core of the thing irradiating by different accidents: quantity, quality, relation, space, time, passion, action, and so on and so on. And in the middle we have the substance. Okay? There is a ABC, very, very barbaric, of Aristotle's ontology. I'm sorry, but anyway, okay? Then this idea is just replaced in the modern scientific paradigm, as we said, by perspective, by which the thing is replaced of a very, very simplified model of the object. Okay? Etc., etc. Okay? So that something, okay, is no longer the thing as in Aristotelian ontology. It's something constructed by the mind by some abstractive analytical operation. Okay? So we extract from the thing, okay, what is not knowable by order and measurement. We have a sort of simulacrum of the thing, responding to clear and distinct rules, okay, and the simulacrum of the thing is the object. Objektum, or in German Gegenstand, is something that is standing in the front of the subject, and all the modern philosophy, including Kant, ask constantly how we can reach an explication of the constitution of the object. Okay? But, of course, there is a sort of scientific distillate, or epistemic, or epistemic distillate, gnosiological distillate of the thing. We don't find the thing back. So the word assumed and constructed by the modern theory of knowledge is something of a word in picture, pictured by laws, scientific laws that are no longer corresponding to the concreteness of the thing. But we speak about object, rationally speaking. The problem is that speaking about object is not neutral. Okay? It gave us access to certain features of the world, and we tend to assimilate this feature as the feature of the word itself. I will not say that speaking about of objects in this epistemic way is the unique way, but we we tend to assume this way as the unique because we don't have another grammar of thinking in order to speaking about something in another way. Okay? This another way has emerged as system. Okay? Let me bring in an example that is very, very intuitive, but is very, very illuminating, and this is the theme by which the Nobel Prize for Physics, Giorgio Parisi, inspired many young researchers, not only in physics, the bird's flock, okay? If you go to Rome, there was my opening experience to complexity. You can watch a very wonderful show in autumn. You can stay on the Pincio terrace looking to Peter's Dome at the sunset, and you see these millions of birds orientating themselves in order to migrate. Okay? An analytic, modern, fashioned way to conceive that bird flock is to consider it as a sum of interacting, just as a sum of many birds, without a specific dynamic. Okay? There is just like just a sum of sand. Okay? The grains of sand make the sand itself. It's not the case. Okay? Because the grains of sand are in a statical relationship within which the flocks are interacting between dynamics that are not the same statical dynamics of the sand grains that we can easily describe with this status of object. Okay? So the bird flock, even here, bird flocks orientating in order to migrate. Million and million birds constructing these wonderful shapes, and the National Geographic made many documentaries and photograph on it, and project on it, is not a sum of object. Okay? It's not an object itself, because it's something that we recognize, but in itself is, if you will, nothing. The bird is something, the air in between is something, the trajectory are something, but together that is nothing in terms of a pure and simple object. Is not an objectum purum et simplex. Why? Not only because it's not a simple object, because it's complex, but it's not pure. That is, it's not homogeneous. The sand is made from the same elements. The birds is not made from the same elements, and the relationships between birds is not made from the same elements. Okay? So this ontological idea of pure and simple object, or this idea of the thing, like in Aristotelian scholastical ontology, must be radically revised or put in revision as the idea of an holistic causality. What interests the ground one of our approach, a rational approach to reality, that is physics, in fact, if you will, also the ground zero of our ontological presuppositions. This is not neutral. Our ontology is determined by patterns following on the other side our language structures. For example, to conceive a substance ontology in the shape of Aristotle, with substance and attributes, outside an Indo-European context, so we are all together here because we have a sort of predicative language, is very difficult. In China and Japan or in other indigenous language in South America, there is no copula. So without copula, it's very difficult to think the attribution of an accident that is a predicate to a substance that is a subject. For this reason, modern science substituting or implementing mathematics to natural language reach the goal to enlarge the scope of our ontology, because there is not linked to the sort of verbal predicative structure of our Indo-European language, okay? So there is not sedimented on the same stuff, okay? And for this reason, for many people, the approach to mathematics is disorienting, because it's another more universal language that has the pattern of which are not sedimented in our brains as the form by which we conceive the world in terms of subject and predicate, okay? Or other indigenous form, and so on, and so on. But now, the system, so radicalize the challenge. Because one of the assets of modern science is to think everything by one language, okay? There is what the choice, the radical choice, is not his own idea of Descartes to define exterior world as rex extensa. Is a choice, a gesture, a founding gesture, because it's very simplifying. And it simplifies our scientific life, okay? Not our everyday life, but our scientific life. This is, everything is homogeneous. The one thing that of these structures that we can conceive is quantity, and if you will, is more simple, because the relationship between something and its quantity can be expressed by an universal language, okay? But if you consider a sum of sand grains by this way, everything is working. If you consider a bird flock, it's not working, because in the bird flock there is an heterogeneity of substances, an heterogeneity of level of organization, an heterogeneity of interaction, an heterogeneity of patterns that are not reducible to this universal language. For this reason, to study, you can say, okay, studying Descartes, Galilei, Leibniz is just a matter of the past. No, no. The idea of lingua universalis in the Renaissance, the idea of mathesis universalis, the idea of science universalis formulated by Leibniz, help us by their internal apories or the internal problems even to understand how we have to think different the world, okay? So now from the mathesis we take off the universalis. I'm a fan of mathesis universalis, but anyway, amicus Leibniz sed magis amiga veritas, okay? That is no longer possible. A bird's flock present to present itself to us as a very different, I would say, think, but I would be mistaken by language, present itself as something radically different. And then you can, if you will, you can notice the problem, your existential problem. You refer yourself as something, okay? But this something is not an object, nor a thing. And if you think as a sort of sum of things, you fail in very huge problem of understanding. If you consider it as an object in a classical epistemic way, you lose all the information that consideration can give to you. And then what you do, either you choose to think different and to develop a new worldview, a new view on the world, or you fall in the classical way to thinking, trivially reductionistic. Then you can go to religions, you can go to superstitions, you can go to animism, I don't know. Okay? Because something like a system is not easy to understand. In the best case, and that concern our second part of the first point, we are able to consider closed systems. That is, a watch. Watch is a system. Motorcycle is a system. I like motorcycle, and I see around the campus Royal Enfield, beautiful exemplars. But I'm more for German motorcycle. But anyway, and if a motorcycle breaks in the middle of elsewhere or somewhere, is a huge problem. But I know how it is working. Okay, it breaks because its piece is broken, and this broken piece do no longer enable the closest system to work, like for my watch. Okay? My organism is not a closed system. It's not a system in a mechanical way. If you take the pancreas for a certain time, you can no longer replace because you're dead. Just to be brutal, you know. And we have huge problem from it. If you erode some part of soil, you cannot replace after, because the ecosystem has died. With the ecosystem has died even the sub-ecosystem, like a population, not only for animals but for the humans. Okay? So the time, if I let, as I unfortunately do, my motor in my garage for 3 months, is enough to take some pieces, maybe a very costly new battery, to branch some things, and I help my friends. My friend is a mechanician, but in 2 hours the problem is solved, and so on and so on. This the time can be reversed by operations. In a system is not always the case. Okay, if you wait too long, the system does not work at the same time, and then you're fucked. In the case of population and so on and so on. If you take a society in terms of mechanical interaction, either you miss the nature of the society, or you take decision about this society that are fully wrong, because all the factors that you consider epistemically as noise are deciding factor. Aspiration of people, emancipation, sexual relation between things. There is all different ontological aspect of this something named system that are relevant and are not just replaceable at any time. Okay? And so on and so on. So one step is to step from our not innate, because as we have seen, is not innate consideration of the system. It's something that comes from our scientific education. Okay, with a further scientific and philosophical education of the object, with a further scientific education to what is a system, but then don't misunderstand a system just as a closed system, that is in the form as a machine, but be able to think open systems. Okay, that is the first step. The second step that is very, very important to approach our modern times, okay, and generally what pertains cybernetics, but also what pertains biology, DNA, and so on and so on, is to think that also a huge difference between the mechanical paradigm or mechanical worldview and our worldview, a transition between energy or quantity of something material, force, and so on, and information. What is the core of cybernetics? So many continental thinkers do huge mistake by following Heidegger in the renowned interview to the Spiegel, where Heidegger say, cybernetics as the art of control. So a sort of symbol of technique of our time. Is false. The huge discovery lying at the ground of cybernetics and building, will or not, our world today, at not only mechanical energy, quantity of movement and impulse and so on are transferable in something like just a watch or a bit thermodynamically a motor, but also information. Biological system are cybernetical system, not why they will control something other in a predatory view, but firstly and mostly because they're able to transfer between the elements information. Okay? Information transfer, okay, at the beginning was related just to our mind. Okay, that is one of the obstacles that we find. Okay, who can transfer information? My mind or my spirits, by language, by soul, I don't know. Okay. Now, even a material system can transfer and elaborate information. So there are not things, there are not objects that can subsist, or that they must subsist often, by transfer of information. This is information, if you will, and then is submitted also to entropy, but anyway, is something that can be transferred and processed even without having a soul, a brain, and so on and so on. What is radically new, if you will. And then, for example, change or bring the Darwinian paradigm or the Darwinian view of biology to a neo-cybernetic Darwinian approach to biology. So, if you will, everything you heard about ADN as the grammar of life, and then there was many ideology on it, but it's based on the fact that this something called DNA is the center of the transfer and the stock of information, or process assimilated by transfer of information. Okay? The third aspect, is the enlargement of our conception of linearity of processes. We have already spoken about it, okay? We are almost naturally, as predators, brought to think that a process is linear because since our beginning, the beginning of human species, okay, we assimilated the thing that something is moving in a linear, even if fragmented trajectory, okay? So implement our view of processes not only as linear is very difficult because as for the things, as for the information and so on, we have patterns on our culture and on our biology that make so that for us the linearity of motion is the most trivial thing that we can announce. Okay? The shock of quantum mechanics comes from the fact that we cannot follow the linearity, or we cannot determine the linearity as such. So non-linearity has to do even to another change of the conception of space, we have already spoken about it, that implement with other forms of spatiality what we said about perspective. Because the non-linearity of processes is not a non-linearity that we can see or watch or observe in a perceptual space. For this reason, it's so difficult for us to conceive. Okay? Show me the non-linearity. No, I cannot show you the non-linearity because in this space, material space, we have linearities and just linearities. As to say, show to me that the sun, show me empirically that the sun is at the center and the earth moves around. Empirically, without scientific education, I cannot show to you. Then now I can, because our science led us to build satellites, and then we can, but the beginning without satellites is impossible. You know, the first experiments, scientific experiments, the Foucault pendulum, and we will find the pendulum once again and once again, that proved that the Earth moves around itself, date at the 18th century. Okay? The experiment. You go to Paris in two different places, the Museum of Art and Sciences, and then to the Pantheon. Maybe you know more the Pantheon as the museum. You find in the middle this pendulum, slowly oscillating. Pay attention to the pendulum because it will come very, very fast in our course. But it's a linear thing, a linear process. In order to conceive the non-linearity of a process, we have to be able to imagine other kind of spaces. And in this view, let me make a parenthesis or an excursus. In this view, please abandon the idea that imagination is not essential for knowledge. Everything that we will see, everything that we have seen since the beginning, because perspective is an act of imagination, because the rule of imagination by Descartes and by Galileo is enormous, is huge, that you can deal knowledge without imagination. You can deal knowledge without free fantasy, but even in your life, in your mind, free fantasy help to sketch new things. And then once bringing that new faculty to imagine to formalism or to experiments, you can discover something other. This is the case of Einstein, for example, okay? But anyway, so it's for us difficult and almost more and more today when we are saturated from floating realities or packet things or the packet imaginary, because we have at first unable to imagine what it could be another space. Not another universe. This is for aliens and so on and so on. It's also helping, but another space. Okay? So drawing elsewhere something other, there is not a sort of reticular thing that we imagine as space. Okay? And the non-linearity take place in such space. So that space, there is a topological space, become the place where we have to find and to search non-linearity. Okay? Even for this reason, misinterpret or underestimate what Descartes said about the many dimensionality of space by which we can think fourth speed is a very great mistake philosophically, because it's the first act to imagine something other as our field of perception. Then, strictly linked to this third line, or this third article, you have the literature with it, equilibrium and far for equilibrium systems. Why? Because we associate in a very non-scientific, in a very kind view, the non-equilibrium or far from equilibrium to chaos. Okay? What we are afraid of at most in our life, because our civilizations, our cosmogonies, our religion, and asserted even in Indian religion, or our Indo-European civilization, told us that the order of the God coming from putting aside the chaos. Okay? That's something inscribed in your mind. So I don't, but in an imaginary sense, I'm afraid from chaos because at first I take it religiously or mystically as a holistic chaos. Okay? Not as scientifically a chaotic local moment of a behavior, but the chaos. So the chaos is opposed to the order. We can live in something ordered. We cannot orient ourselves in the chaos. So just by assimilating what is equilibrium and far from equilibrium related to a system, we can make order and chaos relative and cut off from our mystical fear from the chaos. There are chaotic situations that are the source of novelty without being something negative. Okay? So, but you know that these points are related because linearity and non-linearity, scientifically or rationally speaking, bring us to conceive the equilibrium and far from equilibrium related to what? To a system, not to the whole realm or to the whole reality. And secularizing what they say, that idea makes scientific that idea of equilibrium and far from equilibrium, and the strong relation between equilibrium and far from equilibrium system, we can think to order and chaos in a non-archetypical, mystical, existential way. Okay? So chaos is not the collapse of our known world in a sort of cloud of uncertainty. Chaos is something that relates to far-form equilibrium system that is localized and that is often the source of novelty in the world. New adaptation and so on and so on. And then by rationalizing what equilibrium and far-form equilibrium system and order and chaos are, we can also think what is poiesis in differentiating by autopoiesis, or we can think autopoiesis in particular by relating to information transfer and far-form equilibrium system and open system to the living systems. Okay? Because in the whole world, the one thing that that can be autopoietic is God. We cannot conceive in our world an autopoiesis. The change of our character maybe, or the evolution of our mind, but anyways, very, very small autopoiesis. The autopoiesis, the self-creation, okay, is something that do not belong in our mythical, but also in our mechanical worldview to reality, okay? Belongs to divinity, like eternity. Now, like chaos, we have autopoiesis in nature, in our society, without accepting something mystical. So, if you will, we take such long time in order to explain that, because the first problem with complexity is to take it mystically, and then because we react upon our beliefs on the world that we ascribe by religion, by society, and so on and so on. And then we are a bit confused, because on the one side we have clear concept, very difficult even to imagine. On the other side, we have 5 millionaires of imaginary narrating us what has happened, and the choice is simple. So our choice is to go towards the new worldview, and the most easy choice, or the easiest choice, is to come back to this narration. There is, if you will, is not discarding our civilization. For example, if you read the old Hindu books, or if you read even the old Western books like Hesiod's Theogony, and so on, or Mahabharata, you have something inside that inspires you to think profoundly what is this instability of the realm. I will not say that you have to discard, but one thing is to discard, one thing is to assume unconsciously because we come from it, you know? And then you have a sort of mix of things, religious thinking, mystical thinking, mystical fear, biological fear, fear for the globe, fear for the deregulation, and so on, and you are paralyzed from that view. If you become methodically, you can say, okay, if I misinterpret chaos and I'm feared for chaos, maybe is why I'm passive for certain idea that I received, instead of take the things more clear, defined by concept. So, in such a reconstruction that we have already begun, enable to orient both our theoretical, structural, and genetic, scientific, historical perspective. That is, the emergence of a complex world comes also from political issues, cultural issues, and so on and so on. But the world, even the social world, is already being complex. Now we are aware of it, okay? The emergence of the consciousness or the awareness of the complexity meets a sort of bifurcation. Passivity, that is not understanding rightly what is happened. I will not say that while studying 20-year complexity, I understand what it happens here on there and so on and so on, but I can elaborate patterns, for example, in order to process information. I don't know if in India or in the East, but in the West, what you hear and you watch on the news is not a complotism or conspirationism, don't help to understand what is happening. Okay, 3,000 killed here, the fire, and on the other side in Hollywood, who cares? But anyway, and so on and so on. And you don't understand the geopolitical process. In order to understand the geopolitical process, you have to search another source of information and process your sources of information with the frames you made in order to understand what the geopolitical system is, and so on and so on. Okay? So, summing up minimally, there are scientific issues that resist to the unification of the project of Mathesis Universalis and to the consequent translation of Mathesis Universalis to a universal mechanism that we have explained enough, I hope. For example, the non-Euclidean geometries and the rise of modern topology. Modern topology means infinite variety of spaces. The form of space that we attribute metaphysically to the real by acquaintance is not the one form of spatiality that we think in order to decipher phenomena. We dispose of a variety of forms of spatiality. Taken in existential terms, we can conceive our surface as placed at the crossing of multiple horizons of life. But that's it. I will not to do a course of existentialism, but anyway. So if you conceive yourself as the crossing of multiple horizons of life, you get a different way to consider your life itself. Second, Gödel incompleteness theorems and other negative results in the foundational debate, like Tarski theorem, for example. There is no universal formalized language, like in the presupposition of Mathesis Universalis, able to guarantee about coherence plus completeness, that is absolute truth, and able to deduce the multiplicity of forms, sorry for the mistake, of spatiality mentioned before. This is the opening to our world is not submitted to one and only one grammar, or existentially token to one and just only one code of reasoning. Thermodynamics, up to Boltzmann, not everything is mechanically reversible. There are phenomena interacting, radically intertwined with their context, and not just human phenomena, not just human phenomena or the social phenomena. Some of the issues of thermodynamics with importance to philosophers are the meaning of the probabilistic claims made in statistical mechanics. There's the probabilism, like also in quantum mechanics, but just before, is not a source of metaphysical uncertainty. It's the one way to fix something that cannot be fixed otherwise with universal mechanics, with absolute determinism. Claims made in the nature of the probabilistic explanation it prefers for the observed macroscopic phenomena. The structure of alleged reduction of thermodynamic theory to the theory of the dynamics on the underlying microscopic constituents of matter, the place of cosmological posit in explaining the behavior of local systems, not universal machine, and the alleged reducibility to our very notion of the asymmetry of time, what is to thermodynamic asymmetry of systems in time. What is asymmetry or irreversibility? I cannot reverse the time. Now I stop my watch, as I will do in 1.5 weeks. I put the lancet a bit before, a bit later, I don't know, and I have exactly the position. This is indication of time and not time, but the reversibility of time that if I apply the same force to the same thing, I have the same effect. If I reverse that, okay, I become the initial status. With thermodynamic, with the inconvertibility between worms and work, is not possible. And please, don't take it as mystical. This is just a local phenomenon. There's not a general, like general relativity, is not a universal, or that is the problem for us. There's not a universal assumption about the nature of time. So even if I made ontology and metaphysics, when someone comes and talk to me about the nature of something, I'm something horrified because I don't know how to proceed. The people think about the nature of in singular. And people that talking in singular nowadays are people mostly oriented to fanatism or the superstition, because the singular is even every time easier as the plural. Einstein-Bohr-Heisenberg debate. It's possible that all knowledge let itself unify, it's possible or impossible, in a single, unique, encompassing theory. Is not possible, sorry. Many theories, this is the metaphysician speaking, or many theories can play complementarily, is the complementarity principle announced by Bohr, without or beyond unification. Not by chance, one of the great debates on epistemology in analytic philosophy in the last decades were about unity or disunity of science. One corresponding to the Carnap model of logische Aufbau der Welt, the other coming from Stanford School, but not only, claiming that disunity of science is not a default of rationality. Then the debate is open. What idea we will have or we will present of rationality. Then we have, once these things assimilated by our intellectual civilization, we have many works as milestones to our change of worldview. I will not say that you have to read everything. I add some of them in my Google Drive. My Google Drive is just a library. There is a picture for my paintings, but no, nothing else. For example, I downloaded Ludwig von Bertalanffy General System Theory. It's if someone is interested, I can share. Norbert Wiener, cybernetics is very, very important. Beyond, because, you know, today, in face to the huge expansion of EA and information technology, this theme of cybernetic is socially dividing. Okay? I'm not sympathizing for the big technologies and what they made for our world. But we have to think neutral in face of what cybernetic is at first, then step to philosophy of information, and then step eventually when we have enough complex tools to judge what is happening. And if you are interested, the source of that is the cybernetics of Norbert Wiener. Then we have the very great book, Ludwig von Bertalanffy, General System Theory. Then we had Ilya Prigogine and Isabel Stenger's Dialogue with Nature. Ilya Prigogine was also Nobel Prize for Physics for dissipative structures. Then we have, just in order to fulfill, there is a full library. I just took 5 milestones, okay? Apologize. Benoit Mandelbrot, that I know personally and spoken with him for 1 week, the great masters, the fractal geometry of nature that bring us, in order to come back to the space, to think that there are space which dimension are fractions. What for us is inconceivable. Then, but there is thinking nature like the Cavolo Romanesco that this is are fractals. But anyway, in order to conceive the complexity of nature, we have to reach a such of imaginary dimension by which we conceive the dimension of space, not first step, not as 3 orthogonal lines, 5th postulates of Euclid's, but as many orthogonal things. These lines can be curvilinear, but they can also be, here we have in any case unities. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're just natural numbers. There are dimensions in world or in systems that can, or there are phenomena in systems that can be fixed, recognized, and observed by conceiving space that are dimension of spaces that are dimensioned as fractions. Okay, this is the sort of rise in Alice in Wonderland. Okay, and then very important also for biology, but for many kinds of new forms of approach, Herbert von Foster observing systems. Okay, this is just a short of syllabus. We have still time, isn't it? So, and then we can better understand what it is. I have already commented, so I can jump this slide. But anyway, you have nothing to do, you have to do with an imaginary world, okay? But pay attention that often the imaginary world are more real as we perceive. It's not a sort of matrix lessons. But in a way, something that at our naive world perception appear imaginary, then fixed things that exist. Okay? It's the power and the beauty of what we name thought experiments. Okay? For example, who can think that 2 iron balls thrown from a tower, one of 2 kilos and one of 4 kilos, fall at the same time at the ground? For us, there is a thought experiment that would be made legendary by Galileo, or who can think that they can send by a ship a man and he becomes younger as I stay, as me staying on the earth, and so on and so on. This imaginary things, people working by imagination, you know. When Descartes must present the new world, and the new world is the real world, the world of mechanics, the world of heliocentric things, introduce us as an imaginary tale. La Fable du Monde, the tale of the world, is an unpublished book. And then they presented, let me introduce your mind in the imaginary space. Okay? That is what exceeds our perception is taken at first, or firstly, as fantasy, but then it reveals itself, it can reveal itself, not necessary, as the structure of something new we can discover. Okay? Because the realm is larger as we perceive, simply. What helps in this case to let interact our rational knowledge with art, with literature, and so on and so on. Because the capacity to imagine is essential for knowledge. Because when they say constitutive, to think otherwise. So let's ask the question, some questions. What does it mean for us to replace the paradigmatic pattern of the old worldview, that is the modern worldview as old worldview? The simple single object with the view of a system and then of many open systems. Because if I say the world is a mega system, okay, I fall into the naive holism in which has fallen the old mechanicism. Thinking plurally or pluralistic without to be rational is to think many open systems interacting and maybe heterogeneous each other, because we cannot come back to the holisms or metaphysical holisms. We will find us in our before last lecture about ontology, because there is sort of issues that say complexity is the feature of the world, without noticing that if you say that, you fall in the same problem of metaphysics as an holistic simplism. Okay? So you open to your need of uniformity, and then you made mistakes about the constitution of appearance. What does it mean to think of an open system as one that is constantly moving on the threshold between order and chaos, equilibrium and non-equilibrium, constantly adapting itself with an information exchange with this environment? So that is sort of homework for tomorrow. That is, let's repeat the question and think and work on your mind, on your pattern, in order to figure out what it is. Instead, notions comes and goes without make effects on our rationality. What does it mean to think philosophically of concepts such as non-equilibrium instead of equilibrium, attractor instead of state, non-steadiness, and that is very difficult, to think the flow, the non-steadiness, and to identify it as a definite something. This for us is something that refutes what we become by handling steady object. Okay? It's sort of autobiographical work, intellectually. Fuzziness, for example. time irreversibility instead of time progression, probabilism instead of determinism, process bifurcation instead of process linearity as patterns of the real. To what extent and with what strategies can such a radical upheaval of the conception of phenomenal world be introduced and made comprehensible to the public in a social discussion? And that is the most horrible task, because now we have time, we have structures, we have culture, and we can spend our time by improving our mind to understand. But if the people get 3 minutes in order to become news, how you can explain, this is the difficulty of the global process and the mass media today, how do you can let understand such change of the world to a huge number of people? Because knowledge for initiates is not so useful for society, but you have also to agree that science needs time and spaces, mental spaces, and then the social challenge to provide social debate with not fully determined, but pertinent and informed tools of understanding is, in my view, one of the most huge challenges of our culture today. And replace, if you will, the narratives with the argumentation, but the argumentation in this kind that is not so easy. So, first question, then we will go further tomorrow. Maybe we may make a break in 2 minutes.
It will take some time. Till 3:55 we could go on.
Huh?
Till 3:55.
Okay.
Yeah, we could go on.
Let's focus it by a sort of proto-ontological questioning. What is an object? What is a system? How we can fix the distinction between a closed and open one. So let's deconstruct your ontological framework of referring yourself to something. Okay? In most general sense, that we go superficially, system means a configuration of parts connected and joined together by a web of relationships. And now comes something that you know very well, maybe from the social media, but that is worthy to explore. Another kind of representation. We can topologically represent such situation by a topological graph. Okay? I introduced the topological graph because the network modeling is the general language in order to catch complexity. So, for molecules, for example, we can represent that as such. Okay? There's a graph made for nodes and links. But we can also represent an irregular graph with difference between nodes, flavors or colors, bifurcation, aggregation, clustering, something that you find today even when people present the maps of World Wide Web, for example, or the spreading of a pandemic. Okay? There's a way to present itself that comes from chemistry, of course, the first nodular presentation of chemistry, but please allow me to say that we can, by this representation, give the idea that there are many parts connected and joined together by a web of relationships. So the definition of a system go hand in hand or go without problem with such representation. Nothing but a representation for the moment, okay? Nodes and links. The nodes are the parts and the links are the relationships. Very, very easy. The primary group defines systems as a family of relationships among the members acting as a whole. Von Bertalanffy defines system as an element in standing relationships. What interests us for the first step in complex system theory, complex system philosophy, and the last step of our lecture is, we put aside 2 or 3 slides we will consider tomorrow, is that there is something different acting as a whole. Acting as a whole. Okay? There's the unity of, so the agglomeration of relationship is not something that can be cut off in order to maintain the same. What is not the case for a sum of grains, for example. If I take my watch and I pick up a part, the watch is no longer acting. So I take a motor and I take the carburetor or the piston, it's not acting as a whole. It's not acting at all. It's not acting as a whole because acting for a machine is acting as a whole. Okay? Then for the motor can act without some parts and not without some others. Okay? Like our body. But anyway, it acts not at the same whole, sort of minored one. Okay? So whole and parts are in the system theory, or that can be in the system theory, or in a system, considering by its behavior, inverted from the point of view of priority. That is, it's not true that the whole depends on the sum of its part, because the whole determines the acting of this system over its parts. The part of a system is a part just because structurally act in a whole. So there's this sort of mereological, it's a bit technical, mereological inversion between all and parts. All is not the result, but the determining shape of the parts. Okay? Then we have to stop, and maybe we can discuss that after. We have still 5 slides, and you take, I will transfer these 5 slides for the next session. Okay? Thank you.
Trying to define what exactly a complex system is. Before we start, we should note that there is no formal definition for what a complex system is, and thus there remains many different perspectives and opinions on the subject. What we present here is just a working definition. Firstly, a complex system is a special class of system.
So I go
A
just
system
back.
is simply a set of parts called elements.
Everybody's in? Okay. So let's go back.
In this module, we will be trying to define what exactly a complex system is. Before we start, we should note that there is no formal definition for what a complex system is, and thus there remains many different perspectives and opinions on the subject. What we present here is just a working definition. Firstly, a complex system is a special class of system. A system is simply a set of parts called elements, and a set of connections between these parts called relations. These parts can be ordered or unordered. An unordered system is simply a set of things. Because there is no specific structure or order, we can describe a set simply by listing all of its elements and their properties. So a pile of stones on the ground is an example of an unordered set. As there is no pattern or order to the system, we can only describe it by describing the properties of each element in isolation and then adding them all up, with the whole set being nothing more than the sum of its individual parts. If, in contrast, through the relations, these parts are ordered in a specific way, then they can function together as an entirety, and out of these parts working together, we get the emergence of a global pattern of organization that is capable of functioning as a coherent whole. For example, if all the parts in our car are arranged in a specific way, then we will have the global functionality of a vehicle of transportation, or out of the specific arrangement of billions of cells and the different specialized organs that make up our body, we get the emergence of a global system that enables us to operate as an entire organism. So that is the basic model of a system. It consists of elements and relations. When those elements work together, we get the emergence of a new level of organization. Now, let's start adding complexity to this. Probably the only property that will be in all definitions of a complex system is that they consist of many parts. Many parts that are distributed out without centralized control. Organization is formed out of the local interactions between the parts through a process of self-organization that gives rise to the emergence of new levels of organization. With the phenomenon of emergence that we were previously discussing, a whole new level to the system has developed, which then starts to interact with other systems in its environment, the result being that new patterns of organization develop, and once again we get the emergence of another level of organization, and so on. People form part of social groups that form part of broader society, which in turn forms part of humanity. The point to take away here is that these systems have a hierarchical structure. This is a pervasive phenomenon in our world. Elements are nested inside of subsystems, which in turn form part of larger systems, and so on. All complex systems have this multidimensional property to them. They are composed of many elements on many different scales, with all of these levels affecting each other. A business is part of a local economy, which is part of a national economy, which in turn is part of a global economy. Each is interconnected and interdependent with the others. We cannot fully isolate one component or reduce the whole thing to one level, and this is a primary source of complexity. So this is our first property to a complex system. Many different parts that are distributed out with local interactions and self-organization giving rise to new emergent levels on different scales. Next, interdependence and nonlinearity. The parts to a complex system are highly interdependent, and this interdependence creates nonlinearity. Almost all well-formulated definitions for complex systems involve the term nonlinearity. It is a continuously recurring and pervasive theme. Nonlinearity arises from the fact that when we put two or more things together, the result may not necessarily be a simple addition of each element's properties in isolation. In contrary, we may get a combined effect that is greater or less than the simple sum of each part because of their interdependent nature. Examples of this might be two sound waves that are perfectly out of sync, canceling each other out through noise interference, or the division of labor as can be seen in many human and insect communities, resulting in synergies, which means the output will be far greater than what individuals could accomplish in isolation. Due to what are called feedback loops, nonlinear systems may grow or decay at an exponential rate. These periods of rapid change are defined as phase transitions. Thus, complex systems are known to be able to shift or flip into whole new regimes within very brief periods of time. Some small change in input value to the system can, through feedback loops, trigger a large systemic effect. This is called sensitivity to initial conditions, and it is the central idea within chaos theory. Examples of this butterfly effect can be seen in financial crises and the collapse of ecosystems such as coral reefs. Next, connectivity. Many definitions for complex systems involve dense or high levels of interconnectivity between components. As we turn up the degree of connectivity, it becomes the nature and structure of these connections that define the system as opposed to the properties of its components. How are things connected, and what is connected to what, become the main questions. At some critical level of connectivity, the system stops being a set of parts and becomes a network of connections, and it is now all about how things flow in this network. Networks are the true geometry of complex systems, and this connectivity reshapes our traditional three-dimensional Euclidean conception of space. In complex systems like the global air transportation system, or the financial system, or the internet, space is redefined in terms of topology created by connectivity. What matters is your position in the network structure and your degree of connectivity. Connectivity again leads us into the world of complexity, as the number of relations between elements can grow in an exponential fashion. If we take just a handful of elements, they can become connected in possibly thousands or even millions of different ways. Lastly, autonomy and adaptation. Whether we are talking about a flock of birds, the internet, or our global economy, there is no top-down centralized mechanism for coordinating the whole system. Within complex systems, elements have a degree of autonomy, often through their capacity to adapt to their local environment according to their own set of instructions. Without centralized coordination and with a degree of autonomy, elements can synchronize their states locally or cooperate, resulting in the emergence of patterns of organization from the bottom up. With autonomy and adaptation also comes the capacity for a variety of different responses for any given phenomenon, meaning complex systems are often heterogeneous, with high levels of diversity. Ecosystems and multicultural societies are good examples of this. Without centralized coordination, complex systems develop on the macro scale through a process of evolution. Elements within complex adaptive systems are subject to the evolutionary force of selection, where those that are best suited to that environment are selected and replicated, while others are not. Products are subjected to selection within a market environment. In democracies, politicians are subject to selection by voters, and creatures in ecosystems are subjected to natural selection through competition. In such a way, the whole macro-scale system manages to adapt to its environment without centralized coordination and develop to exhibit higher levels of both differentiation and integration. The greater the autonomy and capacity for adaptation that elements have, the more complex the system we are dealing with. In summary, we have been trying to lay down a basic working definition for a complex system while remembering that there is no formal consensus on the subject. We firstly talked about how a complex system is a special class of system. We defined a system as a set of elements and the relations between them. We saw how when these parts are arranged in a specific order for them to function as an entirety, we get what is called the process of emergence, whereby a new level of organization emerges. We then began to add complexity to our model of a system by defining it as a product of 4 primary parameters. Firstly, talking about the number of elements and different levels to the hierarchy within our system. We then discussed nonlinearity as another dimension to complexity, where non-additive interactions and feedback loops over time can give us exponential relations between the input and output to a system and lead to phase transitions. We also talked about connectivity as another driver of complexity, as heightened connectivity within complex systems means they often appear to us as networks. Lastly, we discussed how autonomy and adaptation enable self-organization and the process of evolution that shapes complex systems on the macro scale.
In consideration of the fact that we practice together philosophical thinking, okay? Let's make a step back, because the first impression you have when you read some tutorial, is just a tutorial, is vertigo. In the sense that you have too many things said, and there is the bad, good aspect of this tutorial when are made with very competent people like the authors of this tutorial, at one time that make it very easy or intuitive, and it's a very, very good thing. The other thing is that it contains too many notions that we began to unfold. We are just at the beginning to unfold these elements, and they speak about geometry, topology, hierarchy, interdependence, adaptation as nothing, where instead, on the contrary, is a very radical difference. Okay? So the first thing, even to my colleague, they teach, and they're very, very renowned theoretical philosophers. You speak to complexity, and they say, yes, it's very, very interesting. So read the introduction to the handbook for philosophy of complex system that you have on your drive, and they recalcitrate, because just the introduction to a simple handbook, okay, entails so different notion from what we learn about the world, that at the second page, third page, they are too tired, and they say, okay, enough, okay? It's the same thing, if you will, with this tutorial, or we will do maybe tomorrow, okay? This tutorial brings, if you will, to you the concreteness and the urgence to study complex system, because it speaks about flock of birds, global markets, supply chain, democracies, multi-ethnical group. It's something that speaks to us, but then at the same time bring very theoretical, laden notion that we are unable to understand. Why? It's not just a publicity for my method, but firstly, why you don't get the time often to follow the genealogy of the concept, okay? So for us, for example, let's take the example of the cube and topological space. Superficially, you can think, okay, it's just another option, okay? Let's take another tool. Epistemologically, it's the case. But philosophically, must be the case. Why? Because the change, so firstly, the possibility to conceive the change of a model, change everything in our approach to rationality, so to get plurality of models, of spaces, and so on, and so on. And then, because you don't really grasp the pertinence of this choice, okay? That is what the hard work of philosophy and I work in theoretical philosophy and always repeat that if I do some parts of philosophy of science, it's not because I like philosophy of science, but because it helps us to understand problems that theoretically speculative you cannot grasp. Okay? So, changing the option between a dry dimensional space or a multi-dimensional space in the sense of the card and many possible topological spaces is, philosophically speaking, leave to explore another continent from the point of view of theory of knowledge, from the point of view of theory of science, from the point of view even of ontology. Okay? So what we will see in the next lectures, okay, is a sort of open exploration. Because as they said, with just a little miscare, there are many opinions on it. We have not many opinions to it. We have many long discussed approach to it, grounded on a very serious discussion on epistemology, on modeling, on ontology, and so on, and so on. Let's take another example. Social politically speaking, okay, a multi-ethnical society can be assumed as a fact. For this concern, we assume the multi-ethnical society, and then we derive or we observe what we have to observe from the point of view of sociology, from the point of view of geopolitics, from the point of view of belief changes, and so on, and so on. But what and how philosophy proceeds is working on the ground, without perhaps giving or trying to give an ultimate foundation, because the ultimate foundation entails problem inner to philosophy and made it maybe impossible. But working on the ground, it means that without understanding what a multi-ethnical society is, every further approach to multi-ethnical society will ungrounded, because we don't understand what it is. So the philosophical work in theoretical philosophy, or in history of philosophy and science, or in epistemology or ontology and metaphysics, lays at that ground that takes stance in a radical change of our representation. Because all the shifts you notice in the tutorial, very smart and very quick. Every 3 seconds, every 4 seconds, there is a shift between one thinks, this is that before, and one thinks another, cumulative, non-cumulative, 1 plus 1 equal or non-equal to 2. Every problem in it entails huge workshop or huge problem for human understanding. And for this reason, we perceive sort of vertigo, because we measure the distance, because the higher theoreticity entailed or contained in such statement, because we are men of science, we know, we can smell the difference, and then we measure intuitively how higher we went when we named such concepts. Okay? That's just a propedeutical thing. And then the choice is, okay, we stop, I come back to my usual business, academical business as usual, or I try to understand. Of course, our understanding will be not fully because we had 10 courses. But nevertheless, you can just grasp what is the novelty, and I repeat once more, even for classical philosophy. So you can wonder why, for example, Descartes asked questions about the change between the old science and the new science, or about the emergence of a new world, and so on and so on. Why Kant question and try to adapt with a very long work his systems, analytics of principle, to the Newtonian gravitation, okay? Or to implement even social issues like enlightenment and so on in this system. And we don't have to do the same. That is the problem. It's not a matter of saying, okay, Kant is old, Descartes is old, well, let's take the novelty and go easily to the sort of lightning future. It's a matter to set your philosophical questioning at the level of theoreticity that your time need to do, you know? That's the difficult maximal task of philosophy, because even if, and I spent more than 20 years about it, Kant is very hard. Kant is very hard. Kant is sort of rebirth of philosophical thinking for everyone spending more than 3 months. Before the 3 months, it can be put aside. After 3 months, you recognize that the critique of pure reason is a sort of rebirth point of your consideration of the world, okay? Science of Logic by Hegel, Metaphysics of Aristotle, Summa Theologiae, let's say, logical investigation, Sein und Zeit, being and time, and so on. But that was their task. Our task is the sum of their task. We can already understand, and our present task. This is the task of rationality in general. It's very disorienting, it's depressing, you know, it's a huge task how we can, but we are not alone. For example, the people that made this very good tutorial, and tomorrow we will see another tutorial, studied years and years in order to do that so intuitively and so pertinently. Whether try to do with this lecture, so with my lecture on the university, or by reading even in another way the Critique of Pure Reason with the Critique of Judgment, or the Faculty to Judge, or other classical, okay? But the problem that they bring examples that has everyday problems in our society, in our knowledge today. Kant couldn't have, because he's living before the Industrial Revolution, the problem of climate change, or the problem, but he lived in a colonial age, the problem of a multicultural, multi-ethnical society, of a massive migration from a continent to another. For us, is the problem coming tomorrow. In Europe, the problem is coming now, at the beginning, okay? So understand global massive migration, needs to understand on the ground what the global massive migration is, and then needs to understand the complexity, and then begins the works of systematic or organic philosophy. Okay? That is the huge problem. Beyond the vertigo, or the vertigo still remain the same and even multiplicated. But anyway, it is something that there is no passion for novelty or new arguments, and so on and so on. For example, when we will speak before last session about methodology, okay? We speak about methodology not because we have a passion for the meta level, okay? But because with the tools of ontology, you cannot give reason with Leibnizian word reddere rationem, or with the Greek words logon didonai, of this structural hierarchical heterogeneity of elements. Because one ontology is a simple ontology of homogeneous object. So if you take a multi-hierarchical system, okay, you have many ontologies. Or if you decode, for example, a simple biosystem or simple ecosystem, okay, you have multiple ontology. How you become the grammar in order to think the coexistence of these multiple kinds belonging to multiple ontologies together. In this sense, we will speak of meta-theory, of meta-ontology, and so on and so on. That the introduction of even hardier formalism, even hardier philosophical questioning, and so on, depends not from the individual that will make it complex or make it a bit for initiates. It depends from the need to adhere to the problem given by the thing. Okay? So there's sort of shock moment that you show the tutorial and we can spend, we have not enough time enough, we can spend 4 days in order to list what we don't understand of that tutorial. And that is the philosophical thinking. By Socrates, people come naively and say, okay, that is, and Socrates says, what is this? Are you sure that you have in possess of an evidence in order to say that it is without exception, without mistake, and so on and so on. If you take even alone, we can also make an experiment. You watch is this on the slide of today? You take the tutorial, just the first, let the second by side, and you list what you don't understand. I bet that you reach at least 50 points, between 50 and 100 points, okay? That is the start of the philosophical question of the thing, and then you have to work what you don't understand, why you don't understand, what's it come from, why we have network modeling, what is the structure network modeling, the flights in the flights of Fly Emirates have been modeled by space, determined by other relation as the metric relation of there are philosophical questions. Then come at the end when we have a sketch, the link to socio-political issues, for example. Okay? That is, I put it exactly in the middle of our course, because now we have to switch to another level. Not in order to let me feel ignorant. This is the worst what a teacher can be or that can do. Just in order to, okay, we warmed up now, but now we go just a bit more radical. Because the thing requests such radicality. Okay? I spent, I don't know how many years on logical investigation of Edmund Husserl and being and time, for example. This is or science of logic. I will never, even under touch, deny that there is monuments of human knowledge. But if you compare the state of the world in which that problems arise and the state of the world in which our own theoretical problem arise, that is most trivial. I will say is not trivial, because problem of existence, evidence, knowledge are never trivial. But the huge mess on changes we have to take into account is like the change, for this reason I for this reason I underline the point, it's like the change between the old world and the new world at the beginning of the Renaissance. So let's, please, the answer I would invite it to.
You are invited to ask questions. A mic would be circulated, so just wait for that.
And if you have a very articulated question and you fear to ask not precisely here, you can send me a mail. They have my mail. I will put the question you sent to me in the slides, anonymous, of course. And then we will handle with this question in the workshop in the next days, okay? So because an articulated question needs also time to be answered or time to be handled. So don't fear, you send me a mail, question about the course, and then I will treat for the next days.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like this, you presented the new world like order or like new ways of thinking. So like does the inherent nature of pattern recognition that we have, so is that important to understand a complex system? Because in a system which is an open system, basically then there's no stability per se, which the things keep on changing. So it's an open system. So is there something which we are presupposing as that, the people who are studying it, or if we are going through it, is that we are trying to recognize a pattern which defines the system itself? So are we presuming it, or is it aiding us to determine where a system, like I am having a problem is like where we can, enclose a system, where does one system start and where does one system ends per se? Like if we have a different paradigm of systems, so how will we determine where the system is like changing its pattern and then the interconnectivity of the systems themselves? So yeah.
So it's depend, very, very good question. And I would answer the question in two different steps. The first step about patterns, and the second about fixing out what the system is and how it's changing. So if we have something like complexity sciences, it means that we began to develop these patterns. Now, the problem is at which level of abstraction you can handle with this pattern and consequently handle with the problem that the change of patterns involve. For example, this is a sort of scientific society interaction, okay? But so let's take sense in science. We have many 100 years of science enabling us to define patterns of complex systems. And the pattern of complex systems depend not only from the model, and we will see that in the seventh lecture, only from the model that we arrange in order to study the system, but also from the epistemic structures involved, from the theories that are involved. So, for example, if in climatology, the patterns of a system, like an ecosystem, can change, but the element or the context or the metrics, temporal metrics, spatial metrics, that I have to use in order to recognize the change of a pattern remains the same, And even with this idea of plasticity of science, of scientific approach, even with a given structure, recognizing a pattern, I notice a loss of information, I can implement my structure in order that my structure be more granular, that is, goes a bit deeper into in order to discover something other. What is not the case with an holistic model. In a holistic model, this is in and out. Okay, there is no holistic model. There's modern science developed even more granular patterns to discover, but with the presupposition of ontological homogeneity and so on, there is a sort of disjunction between capting or not capting, or capturing and not capturing. Not by chance, what was complex was defined as noise. This is, let's put aside the noise and concentrate ourselves to the salient structure that is invariant and so on and so on. In this case, we learn to recognize that in noise that can be other salient things, and then we can implement our models following the structure. For example, I will wonder that even by changing an ecosystem cannot be identified by modifying with a certain degrees of freedom the original structure from where came the first model we use, you know? I will not say that it is a patchwork, but it is a sort of ongoing process to refinement and for reaching a better granularity in order to catch what in an holistic view is not so easy to do. Okay? So if a pattern change, not everything change. The taxonomy cannot change because instead we have not the same thing. So if I rightly construct the model ongoing from a theory or a convergence of theories, yes, the pattern can change, new patterns can emerge, but the taxonomy will not be erased in order to establish another taxonomy. You know? That's...
This is somewhat in continuation to what I was just speaking to you about previously. So, like I've read with Laszlo, just with reference to that, in the old materialistic system, it seemed the old materialistic system seemed to me as very objectively oriented, right? The atomistic system that Laszlo speaks of or writes of. This new system to me seems very subject oriented. Now my question is that true? And if not, what would be the sort of relationship between the subject and the object in this new holistic system, this complex system that
there's no
you're speaking of?
So it depends, firstly, from what you intend as subject and object-oriented. The old system following Laszlo is one of the first to think of system view. This is sort of prehistory, okay? Even in my view, too holistic point of view and too triumphal point of view by erasing the problems. But anyway, what it can seem to be the difference between subject-oriented and object-oriented, if you take as object-oriented, okay, I go very slowly, what is an inanimate nature, instead of here we deal also with living matters, with living beings, with ecosystems, and so on and so on. But it's not subject-object oriented. It is sort of the object orientation at a larger spectrum, including something, and you study that stuff, so including something that will be proposed from the new organistic philosophy of nature through Romantic and of Goethe, that is if we will reach a knowledge about what encompasses us, including living nature. We cannot conceive the object, what we observe, as an inanimate mass having just energy, impulsion, and so on and so on. And when we take in account something other as simply matter, okay, we have to implement, to improve or substitute our grammar of thinking. What emerges also, I will mention for other purposes the critique of capacity of judgment of Kant, by Kant. Because in the third critique, Kant opens an epistemic side to living organisms, okay, to teleology, by saying that the rules used by determining judgments in physics cannot be used in the same way, but analogically for thinking, organism, nature, ethical teleology, and so on and so on. But it's not a change about subject-oriented and object-oriented. The spectrum of Objektivität, Gegenständlichkeit, is more or infinitely more wide as the spectrum that we had before. This is a very, very selective spectrum. So it is not a reflexive approach. Of course, such domain of complex system entails us, so the subject is not exterior to nature, is inner to nature. We discover ourselves as complex systems, so we think also about ourselves, our brain, as complex system, but still remain in a sort of cognitive relation, the object pole and not the subjective pole.
When a system is bigger than the limit of what we can actually model with our current paradigms, how do we deal with retranslating the informations? Because as you mentioned, different matrices or spatial dimension and vectorial dimensions and temporal dimensions of what a system can be. A good example is atmosphere. For example, we try to predict how good we can predict the weather. Other than the historical predictive modeling, we have nothing that we can surely model it with, even with our current computers. Why? Because there are limits. We still don't know what are the other components that really affect the weather. So that is one of the fundamental problems that comes.
There's this translation between models.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to ask is, unless we really list down all the components that really factor into the change of weather, we cannot really define the system itself. So in the process of defining also, the problem is the translation of information. So I wanted to understand, do we really have a system for that?
We're searching for that. Is a very, thank you for the question. The question, if you will, let two questions arise, one epistemological and one practical, scientific, and one ontological, well, I say. Ontological in both sense, classical ontology and ontology of programming, okay? Because now we modeling, we make ontologies to be inscribed in programming for simulation. So, just,
Information side.
yeah. So one thing is a scientist is not scandalized from this difficulty of translation. Is in the practice of science usual, the everyday bread to handle with this difficulty of translation that is epistemologically more difficult to understand. That is, going from one ontology to another ontology is not so easy. It's not easy to understand. But now we are in the state of mind, in sense of philosophical after metaphysics, to accept it. If you will, I mentioned before ontological relativity by Quine in my first lesson. There is no problem. We know that we can go from one ontology, which implementation in the model gives certain result, to another ontology that gave more precise result, but for example, in predictability. And there is the usual business of science, you know? The other question is, and there is my mortal question, how we can build a general model that enable us to think going through this ontology with precisions. Okay? For this reason, we talked yesterday about category theory, because it's a more flexible tool focused on locality of transformation between one structure to another structure and corresponding sets and so on, as the set theory. That is what we are searching for. It is sort of formalized descriptive, what they call formalized descriptive meta-ontology. The goal is to be able, not only at the level of practical modeling, where ontologies, translation are made pragmatically, okay? But from the theoretical point of view, do we have, or can we have, the possibility to sketch a grammar? There's not the grammar of objectum purum et simplex, that is inscribed in a sort of intertwined essential relation between epistemology and ontology, but to map the changes between one ontology and one other that comes in question when it matter of taxonomies. Because the taxonomy is an ontology.
Especially in the dynamic system.
Yeah, because when new patterns emerge, we are forced to introduce new kinds. These new kinds, if are novelty in sense of emergence, correspond to new ontological kinds, and you must be able to retrace it, to retrace the change, because the problem is not the change, as the problem is not the translation. The problem, in my view, anti-metaphysical, is to track the degrees of freedom in our approach to what we call something.
Here there will be one more philosophical problem, that for the first time, as she was asking, the subject and the object really come into picture, because very moment you create a system reference point, perspective. In a dynamical system, even the perspective has to have a learning loop connected with the system to give it the further feedback of what is all changing when the components are engaging.
Yeah, but if you will, having been chastened from the Eden of the stabilization of, that is, I speak of Eden. Why? Because in the Eden, Adam give the names to the things, and giving the names to the things make the things that they are. Having been chastened from the Eden, in sense of Quine ontological relativity, we can adapt easily our knowledge to this flexibility or the fluctuation of relation between ontology and think. But the problem is how we can give a cartography of this change.
There's one more problem with that, actually, because the philological problem of meaning. Over the period of time, the meaning is also contextually changing. So amorphization is there of the context and of the meaning. So if we were to really trace it, are we getting it?
Yeah, I don't know if I understand, but even in this case, I would say the problem is the scandal. So now we can handle even robot can handle, with contextual situation without scandal. And even a theory of knowledge, what they say, starting from Husserl on one side and working precisely on it, Neumann, Horizon, and so on, and Wittgenstein on the other sides. We can think a sufficiently stable, but at the same time, a sufficiently flexible state of knowledge, take position in a field of knowledge wherein we can move without loss of evidence. The problem is the search or the need of absolute evidence. If you will, or if you're still willing absolute evidence, the contextuality is the worst enemy you can have. But the problem is metaphilosophical. Who needs an absolute evidence in order to do knowledge? Is sort of theological need, okay? So, perfectly, bit later?
Easy one.
Okay. No, for me it's still question?
Any more questions?
I can build upon my question.
Louder.
One very good example of how context is important is something that we can see with the companies which are sharing building the large language models. So a large chunk of their budget allocated is going to the amorphization problem or the problem of context itself, which for the first time, initially when we were trying to synthesize all of the human historical knowledge, was not a big challenge. But now for the first time when thermodynamics really came into play to deal with these word-producing systems, we're actually dealing with the same problem. The problem of amorphization, or how...
The problem of, please?
Amorphization, that is words changing their meanings or evolving their meanings contextually across the cultures at a very fast pace, leading to dynamics within the system itself, of the words itself.
Yeah, you have not a package of significant and a package of references that we can fix it by one-to-one. But we always say this is philosophy of language and linguistic handled sufficiently good in the last century in order to accept it and to have even more method by syllabi, by even informatical tools to handle with it without problem. Once more, the problem is if you search the non-equivocity of language, then you have problem. This is, just a moment. That is the very, and for this reason, I invite you to read the second part of the paper, The Mystery of Cosmos, by Wittgenstein. If you're searching to eradicate from this is the lesson of the first and the second, one of the lesson of the shifts between the first and the second Wittgenstein. If you try to eradicate from the language, from one language, every form of semantic oscillation, then you are in trouble. But by being aware, and now we must be aware, of the flexibility of language and then of the hybridation of language. For example, I live in country wherein every kind of expression is hybridated with informatical expression, with English expression, and at a certain point you hear people that looks like the Salvatore in the Name of the Rose, that they speak every language and no one. But the problem is, scientifically speaking, is not a huge problem. A huge problem now is if we will to take a fixed point once for all in order to describe such changes.
But but all that you're saying is based on a very simple fundamental premises, but that is that we have all the disposable vocabulary with us already. We don't need new words and new concepts.
No, I don't think so. I
Yeah,
don't
that
think
is the
the
challenge.
invention, science proceeds or by radical modification of word meanings or by invention of new languages. This is what belongs also to imagination. Let's take the example that we talked before. If you will stay to the predicative language of our everyday life, you cannot make physics. Okay? If you stay at the language of first order logic, you cannot make informatics. So you have to invent new language in order to go further.
Yeah, that was my point. That was the real point, that we still have to, even the system we are using to explain a complex system needs a new injection of vocabulary or concepts to evolve itself simultaneously, just to interact and contextualize all the information that it needs to evolve further and to understand that complex system.
I agree.
Yeah.
But I don't think this is a problem. There is
That
a
is a
need.
challenge, sir.
A challenge,
That
yeah.
is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that is the biggest
in the
challenge.
epistemology.
I will say not only in epistemology, even in society.
In society, yeah.
For example, the social media do not enlarge but restrict our lexicon. There is social studies that prove that people immersed in social network dynamics have a even smaller vocabulary. And the social challenge, let me finish, the social challenge is how you can assimilate that things to people that use even less at the lexicon used for his grandfather.
That was something done by Frank Ramsey number.
Yeah.
Correlated to, he was the contemporary of Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
I think you're talking about that same limit of what all, I think they call it the zeitgeist location.
Yeah, that is not the same. That is not
similar concept.
We move in the same area, but it's not the Ramsey problem. But the real societal problem is that while we have to go in one direction in a radical change and enlargement of our lexicon in order to understand the world, the technical world and the exhaustion of institution brings us to have even a smallest vocabulary in order to understand the world. And this is very dangerous, even politically, because if you pay attention, for example, to the last American election, who won? Won because they use a very simple, elementary language. And you cannot afford modern giving the impression that with the simplest language you can solve the problem. On the contrary, they even not approach the problem. There is a societal, for example, we come back to your taxonomy of ecosystem or atmosphere. Without educating people to think by new words, or by new patterns, or by new schemata, or so on and so on, what it is, the problem, the people do not identify it. And then they put it aside in order to say it's not important.
There's one more very, very basic and fundamental way how I see it as a fault line in our language system is the spatiality of a word. For example, if I say I'm angry, I can say I'm very angry, but can you really define it? What is very? How long or how broad it is? The reach of the word itself. That is where the one extension of understanding of what we really call meaning comes into picture.
That is a huge problem. This is about meaning and expression, but it goes too far in order to our concern. But anyway, this is the spectrum of not only of expression in the same language, of many language we can speak and hybridate themselves. give our access to nature or to world. That is my Wittgenstein postulate, if you will. There's the limit, and not just linguistic, the limit of our world depends on our capacity to handle with languages. That is for sure. There is the simplification of debate, simplification of narrative, exhaustion of new forms of narrative are not a step to concreteness of agency. That's a very educational problem, because the neoliberal liberal economy said, enough with literature, enough with, because it's not just matter of language, okay? And then you watch, for example, today, a public debate, don't know if in India, but in Europe it's the same, and sort of so poor debate that they cannot even put the question on the table, because it's just a sort of succession of opinions without, not without meaning, without serious political meaning. So that is a very, very educational problem. I'm not the partisan, because I just explained everything with natural sciences, not the partisan of social science. But it's very, very dangerous to exhaust social sciences with the alibi that it not brings to the solution of problems.
Any more questions? All right, then we meet tomorrow. I'll write to you. Yeah.
So, if I have to reach the 3 hours,